Cuba has a long history of radio as a lifeline for news and information, especially in times of limited access to the outside world. Joining us now is Tom Martinez, the CEO of Solmart Media. He is a veteran of Spanish language radio with more than 40 years covering the island. He's here to help us understand not just what's happening now, but also the infrastructure in Cuba. Tom, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'd like to know, what are your insights in terms of what is happening in Cuba at the moment?
Well, let me begin by saying that Cuba is probably going through its worst crisis in the last 66 years since the revolution came on, and people are really suffering. You know, since Maduro was extradited from Venezuela, Cuba has just gone down in a spiral, and because basically Cuba relies on oil, you know, electricity and everything else, you know, that the government produces, and it's based on oil. And since the U.S. cut off the oil supply, they're like in a horrible situation.
As you follow this, what are some of the comments that have caught your attention? You said earlier that Secretary of State Marco Rubio had been talking about the island nation.
Yeah, there's a sense in South Florida in particular that Cuba is going to be free tomorrow. And that is not necessarily what the U.S. Secretary Marco Rubio is saying. He's saying that this is going to be a gradual process. It's not going from night to day. And that's what we should be expecting. And if the people will have a better life afterwards, I think that's a big step forward.
So many years, Cubans have been talking about TV Marti, Radio Marti. TV Marti no longer exists. Radio Marti still does. It's been broadcast, according to the research that I found, it broadcast out of a building in Miami nightly from 10 to midnight. And the content is pushed out in Spanish. It's from Radio Caracol, and you worked there.
Right.
What was your experience with Radio Marti?
Well, first of all, Radio Marti has been around for a long time. And they've had a history of interference from the Cuban government. The Cuban government, even though they were jamming the signal all the time. And then somebody at the Voice of America had the bright idea that if they were not going to let their signal in through the regular antennas, they're going to hire some of the local stations to broadcast their content. And while I was in Radio Caracol, what they did was they came to us and said, you know, we want to buy some hours from you guys to retransmit what we're already doing on Radio Marti. And we did that. And they were on the air, I think it was between 11 and 2 a.m. or something like that. And they've been there ever since.
And they're still there.
Yeah, because they're reaching, I believe it's the western part of Cuba. And we used to get feedback from Cuba all the time, people that were listening to us.
Radio has always been a part of Cuban life. Cubans on the island and outside of the island, they've always relied on radio. What is the infrastructure there like now?
Well, I can tell you from both sides. I can tell you that in Cuba, most people think that there's only Radio Reloj, which is the news station, Radio Rebelde, Radio Progreso. Those are the main networks that cover the whole country. But there's also a whole group of small stations, which they call community radio stations, that are established in the little towns. And many people have told us that they listen to those stations more than to the national networks, because they talk about what's going on in their communities. Radio has always been community driven, and even in Cuba, and even under this regime, still seems to be going that way.
Incredible. What role, when you look at the change in Cuba, if and when it does come, looking at the infrastructure of communications, whether it's media, whether it's radio, whether it's television, what role do you think that U.S.-based Cuban media professionals should play or could play in a new or free Cuba?
I think, first of all, we have to get to know the people that are doing their work there now. Second of all, I think slowly we have to play the role of advisors, of letting them know how commercial radio works, letting them know how journalists do their work on the air. Also establishing some rules and regulations, just like we have here in the US with the FCC. So there's a whole process of education and mentoring that I think will take place, or should take place.
So I hear you say mentoring, consulting. I don't hear you say taking over, controlling?
I would love to be part of a group, if my life goes that far, that maybe we could buy some kind of a communication asset in Cuba. But at the same time, you know what, just helping out, I think will be gratifying.
What are you most worried about at this moment in time for the people living in Cuba?
What I'm most worried about is people dying. When the electricity goes out, people who are in life support, babies who are in life support, die. So that to me is what really has impacted me.
Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts and your perspectives with us.
Thank you for the invitation.
That is Tom Martinez, the CEO of Solmart Radio.